Introduction. The city beneath the surface. Long before maps were drawn and kingdoms were named, travelers spoke of a remarkable city hidden beyond a range of white mountains. From a distance, it looked ordinary. The streets were quiet. Its buildings were elegant but not extravagant. Its people dressed simply, spoke softly, and never seemed in a hurry. Yet merchants who visited the city always returned puzzled. No matter how difficult the economy became, no matter how many neighboring kingdoms struggled, this city continued to flourish. Its markets remained busy. Its people remained calm. Its prosperity seemed untouched by the storms surrounding it. Naturally, outsiders assumed they had discovered a secret gold mine. Others believed the city possessed magical treasures buried beneath its streets. Many searched. None found anything. One autumn evening, a young traveler arrived hoping to uncover the mystery. An elderly architect welcomed him and offered a tour of the city. As they walked, the traveler admired magnificent libraries, peaceful gardens, marble bridges, and grand halls that had stood for centuries. Finally, unable to contain his curiosity, he asked, "Where does all this wealth come from?" The old architect smiled. Instead of pointing toward the buildings, he pointed beneath them. "You are looking in the wrong direction. The secret has never been above the ground. It has always been below it." The traveler frowned. That night, carrying a lantern, the architect led him beneath the city. Below every magnificent building stretched enormous stone foundations. Invisible, silent, perfectly engineered. "You see," the architect whispered, "people travel here hoping to copy what they can see. But everything that matters was built where no one ever looks." Money works much the same way. Most people spend their lives chasing visible wealth. A higher salary, a bigger house, a newer car, a larger investment account. But visible wealth is only the roof. Very few people ever build the foundation. Habits, systems, discipline, patience, self-control. These invisible structures determine whether prosperity quietly grows or quietly collapses. This audiobook is not about getting rich quickly. It is about building a financial life so well designed that wealth becomes a natural consequence rather than a constant pursuit. Over the next chapters, you will explore the hidden systems that quietly separate those who remain trapped from those who gradually become financially free. Some lessons may challenge what you've always believed. Others may reveal patterns you've never noticed before. And by the end of this journey, you may discover that the greatest difference between wealth and struggle has never been income alone. It has always been the invisible architecture beneath it. Chapter 1. The Illusion of More. In the center of the ancient city stood a magnificent fountain unlike any other. Water poured endlessly from its highest marble basin. Visitors gathered each morning, amazed by its beauty. "It never runs dry," they whispered. "It must be connected to an endless spring." A young apprentice architect believed the same. "If I could build a larger fountain," he told his master, "it would surely become even more magnificent." The old master simply nodded. Several months later, the apprentice completed his masterpiece. It was twice as tall, twice as wide, twice as expensive. On the day it was unveiled, the entire city gathered. For a few glorious hours, water cascaded beautifully through every marble tier. Then, slowly, the flow weakened. By sunset, only a thin stream remained. Within days, the fountain stood nearly empty. The apprentice was devastated. "I made it bigger," he said. "Why didn't it become better?" The old architect walked quietly around the fountain before kneeling beside its foundation. Hidden beneath the marble were dozens of tiny cracks. Water had never stopped flowing into the fountain. It had simply escaped faster than it could be collected. The master looked at his student and asked, "Would doubling the water supply have solved the problem?" The apprentice stared silently at the leaking stone. Then he finally understood. No amount of new water could fill a vessel that refused to hold it. Many people live exactly like that fountain. They spend years believing the next raise will solve everything. Another promotion, a better paying job, a larger bonus. Surely then, life will finally feel secure. Yet something strange often happens. Income rises, stress remains, lifestyle expands, savings stay the same. Months later, they wonder why nothing truly changed. The answer is almost never found in the paycheck. It is found in the leaks. A higher income flowing into an unchanged financial system rarely creates freedom. It usually creates larger expenses. The fountain grows, so do the cracks. Modern life quietly encourages this illusion. Every advertisement tells us that comfort is only one purchase away. Every new convenience promises to simplify life. Every upgrade whispers, "You've earned this." Individually, these decisions seem harmless. Collectively, they become invisible currents carrying wealth away long before it has the chance to grow. The danger isn't spending. The danger is spending without awareness. There is a profound difference. One is intentional. The other is automatic. An old merchant once told his son, "If your boat keeps sinking, don't waste your life searching for a bigger river. Repair the boat." Those simple words carried more financial wisdom than most people receive in a lifetime. Because the size of the river was never the problem. The condition of the boat was. Likewise, many people are trying to solve behavioral problems with income solutions. They hope more money will create discipline. But discipline rarely arrives with a larger paycheck. It usually disappears beneath a larger lifestyle. History offers countless examples of people who earned extraordinary incomes yet accumulated very little lasting wealth. It also offers examples of ordinary earners who quietly built remarkable financial freedom over time. The difference was rarely intelligence. It was structure. The first group allowed money to dictate their behavior. The second designed behavior before the money arrived. That quiet reversal changes everything. Imagine two travelers carrying identical leather bags filled with gold coins. The first walks carelessly. The bag has a tiny tear near the bottom. With every step, a coin slips unnoticed onto the road behind him. The second traveler carries an identical fortune. But before beginning his journey, he spends a few minutes reinforcing the seams. Years later, people admire the second traveler's wealth and assume he discovered a secret treasure. They never realize his greatest advantage wasn't finding more gold. It was simply keeping what he already had. Perhaps the first step toward financial freedom isn't asking, "How can I earn more?" Perhaps it is asking, "Where is my wealth quietly escaping?" That question is uncomfortable. But every meaningful transformation begins with seeing reality more clearly than before. Because before you build a stronger future, you must first understand the invisible forces quietly shaping your present. And in the next chapter, we will descend beneath those foundations to uncover the smallest cracks of all the tiny, almost invisible leaks that silently drain fortunes long before anyone notices they exist. Chapter 2. The Invisible Leaks. There is an old story about a king who ruled over the richest city in the eastern kingdoms. His treasury overflowed with gold. Merchants crossed continents to trade within his walls. The people lived peacefully, and every harvest seemed more abundant than the last. Yet one winter something impossible happened. The royal treasury began shrinking. No war had been fought. No famine had struck. Taxes continued arriving as always. Trade remained prosperous. Still, every month, there was less gold than before. The king summoned his greatest generals. "Has someone stolen from us?" They searched the city for thieves. They found none. He questioned his ministers. "Has trade slowed?" It had not. He even accused neighboring kingdoms of secretly draining his wealth. But nothing explained the mystery. Finally, an elderly engineer requested permission to examine the treasury itself. He walked through the enormous stone vault in complete silence. He ignored the mountains of gold. Instead, he knelt near the floor. Hours later, he returned carrying something no larger than a pebble. It was a broken section of an ancient drainage pipe hidden beneath the foundation. For years, tiny gold coins had slipped through narrow cracks in the floor, falling unnoticed into underground waterways. No one had heard them. No one had seen them. 1 coin was meaningless. 1,000 coins were a fortune. The king looked astonished. "So, we were never robbed?" The old engineer smiled. "No, Your Majesty. You simply never noticed the leaks." Many people imagine financial struggle as something dramatic. A failed business, a sudden medical emergency, losing a job. Those events certainly happen. But for most people, wealth doesn't disappear all at once. It disappears quietly, one unnoticed habit at a time. A subscription that no longer serves you. Another meal ordered for convenience. Small purchases made to escape boredom. An impulse justified as a reward after a difficult day. None of them feel dangerous. That is precisely why they are. Imagine standing beside a magnificent marble reservoir that supplies water to an entire city. One morning, the water level has fallen ever so slightly. No one worries. The next day, another small drop. Still nothing alarming. Weeks pass. Months pass. The decline remains almost invisible. Then one summer afternoon, the reservoir stands nearly empty. People blame the drought. They blame the weather. They blame bad fortune. Few remember the tiny crack that appeared months earlier. The reservoir was never emptied in a single day. It was emptied one unnoticed drop at a time. Money behaves much the same way. Rarely does a fortune disappear because of one terrible decision. More often, it fades through hundreds of ordinary ones. There once lived a skilled watchmaker whose creations were admired throughout the kingdom. One afternoon, a wealthy merchant brought him an expensive mechanical watch that had stopped working. "It must be a major failure," the merchant insisted. "It was functioning perfectly yesterday." The watchmaker carefully opened the case. Inside, every gear remained flawless. Every spring was intact. Only one tiny grain of sand had become lodged between 2 delicate teeth. The merchant laughed. "That? Surely something so small cannot stop an entire watch." The watchmaker gently removed the grain and wound the mechanism once more. Instantly, the watch sprang back to life. He handed it back and quietly said, "Great machines rarely fail because of great problems. They fail because small problems remain unnoticed." Financial systems work the same way. Most people never examine the tiny decisions that quietly shape every month. Because tiny decisions don't demand attention. They ask for permission, and permission is almost always granted. It begins innocently. A streaming service, a premium subscription, coffee purchased every morning because it's easier, food delivered because cooking feels inconvenient. A small purchase to celebrate the end of a stressful week. None of these choices are inherently wrong. The danger lies elsewhere. It lies in repetition. Habits quietly become systems. Systems quietly become lifestyles. Lifestyles quietly become financial destinies. An old merchant once taught his apprentices a curious exercise. Every evening, before closing the marketplace, he asked them to place every coin they had spent that day onto a wooden table. The first evening felt easy. The second, slightly uncomfortable. By the 7th day, something unexpected happened. The apprentices stopped spending as carelessly. Not because they had less money, because they had greater awareness. The merchant smiled. People protect what they regularly observe. What remains unseen rarely remains protected. Awareness has an unusual power. It changes behavior without demanding extraordinary discipline. Imagine walking through a garden carrying a bucket filled to the brim with water. If someone tells you the bucket has a hole, you suddenly begin watching every drop. You adjust how you carry it. You move more carefully. You become intentional. The water hasn't changed. You have. Money responds in much the same way. The simple act of paying attention often reduces waste before any complicated financial strategy is introduced. There is another reason invisible leaks are so dangerous. They rarely feel emotional. No one remembers buying a small luxury weeks later. No one celebrates another forgotten subscription. No one proudly recalls the 10th impulse purchase made out of boredom. Yet together, These invisible moments quietly shape the future. A builder studies blueprints before laying stone. A captain studies currents before leaving harbor. Likewise, those who build lasting wealth learn to study the quiet movements of their money before asking it to grow. Because growth without awareness resembles pouring fresh water into a cracked reservoir. More water delays the problem. It never solves it. Late one evening, the king returned to the treasury after the damaged drainage pipe had finally been repaired. The room looked exactly as it always had. The gold had not multiplied overnight. The vault had not become larger. Nothing appeared different. Yet the king smiled. For the first time in months, his wealth was no longer quietly disappearing. The greatest victory had not been earning more. It had been stopping what was silently escaping. Perhaps financial freedom begins much earlier than most people imagine. Not with investing, not with promotions, not with extraordinary opportunities. It begins with attention, with honesty, with the willingness to examine the smallest habits before chasing the largest rewards. Because once the leaks have been sealed, something remarkable happens. Every future effort begins producing greater results. And that is when a person becomes ready for one of the most difficult financial choices of all, to resist the temptation of looking wealthy in order to quietly become wealthy. That is where our journey leads next. Chapter 3. The Strength of Enough. There is an old story about two brothers who inherited the largest vineyard in their valley. Their father had spent 50 years building it. Every vine had been planted by hand. Every stone wall had been carefully placed. When he died, the brothers divided the estate equally. For a time, their lives looked almost identical. They harvested the same grapes. They sold to the same merchants. They earned nearly the same income. Then something subtle began to happen. The first brother believed prosperity should be visible. Each successful harvest became an excuse to improve his lifestyle. A grander carriage, a larger home, imported furniture, exotic foods from distant kingdoms. His neighbors admired his success. Whenever someone praised his beautiful estate, he smiled with quiet satisfaction. The second brother made different choices. His house remained simple. His carriage aged gracefully. His clothes rarely changed. Instead, each season he quietly purchased another nearby vineyard whenever one became available. He repaired irrigation canals. He improved the soil. He planted young vines whose harvest he would not enjoy for years. The villagers often whispered, "Why does he live so modestly? Surely he can afford more." The second brother only smiled. "I can. I simply prefer owning tomorrow." Years passed. Then one unusually harsh winter arrived. The harvest failed. Trade slowed. Many vineyard owners struggled to survive. The first brother sold land to maintain the lifestyle everyone expected him to have. The second brother quietly purchased that same land. Not because he was fortunate, because he had prepared. The difference between the two men had never been income. It had been restraint. Modern life encourages us to believe that success should always be visible. The nicer home, the newest car, the latest technology, the expensive vacation. These become symbols that tell the world, "I've made it." Yet appearances often tell only the smallest part of the story. A magnificent tree may display countless branches reaching toward the sky, but no one applauds the roots hidden beneath the earth. And yet, the roots determine everything. There is a curious illusion that accompanies rising income. Each increase quietly expands our definition of normal. The apartment that once felt luxurious soon feels ordinary. The phone that once seemed extraordinary suddenly appears outdated. The car that filled us with pride becomes something we barely notice. Psychologists sometimes call this adaptation. Ancient philosophers simply called it desire without discipline. The destination keeps moving. Satisfaction keeps retreating. And no amount of income can ever outrun an appetite that continually expands. An elderly sculptor once displayed two magnificent statues in the city square. The first was carved from brilliant white marble and covered with delicate gold leaf. Crowds gathered around it every day. The second stood quietly in a nearby garden. Simple, elegant, almost unnoticed. A young apprentice asked, "Master, why does the second statue seem so much smaller?" The sculptor smiled. "It only appears smaller because the first one demands attention." Years later, the first statue had weathered badly. The gold had faded. The marble had cracked. The second statue remained almost unchanged. Quiet beauty had required very little maintenance. The first had constantly demanded more. The sculptor turned toward his apprentice. "There is a lesson here. Some things own us. Long after we believe we own them. Lifestyle often behaves exactly like that first statue. Every upgrade quietly creates new expectations. A larger home asks for higher maintenance. A luxury vehicle asks for expensive insurance. Premium conveniences quietly become necessities. Without noticing, comfort slowly transforms into obligation. Freedom becomes dependence. And dependence is rarely visible until life becomes difficult. Imagine climbing a mountain. One traveler carries only what he truly needs. The journey is demanding, but steady. Another fills his pack with beautiful objects collected along the way. Each item seems insignificant. A decorative stone, polished vase, a silver ornament. Hours later, the second traveler can barely continue. The mountain did not become steeper. His unnecessary weight became heavier. Money works in much the same way. Many financial burdens begin as choices that once felt harmless. There was once an old gardener whose estate became famous throughout the kingdom. Visitors expected to find rare flowers and elaborate fountains. Instead, they discovered wide open spaces, healthy trees, rich soil, simple stone paths. One visitor finally asked, "Why don't you decorate your garden like everyone else?" The gardener knelt beside a young oak tree. "When a tree is young," he said, "every extra branch steals strength from its roots. So I remove what is unnecessary, not because I dislike beauty, but because I love strength more." The visitor looked around the peaceful garden. For the first time, its simplicity felt luxurious. Real wealth often carries an unexpected quality. It creates options instead of obligations. The freedom to leave work without panic. The ability to help family without borrowing. The confidence to survive unexpected storms. These forms of prosperity rarely appear on social media. They rarely impress strangers. Yet they provide something far more valuable. Peace. Peace cannot be purchased in a single transaction. It is quietly accumulated through thousands of disciplined decisions. Late one afternoon, the two brothers met once again at the edge of their father's oldest vineyard. The younger brother looked across the expanding fields now belonging to his elder sibling. "I always thought you were sacrificing too much." The elder brother shook his head. "I wasn't sacrificing. I was choosing." The younger brother frowned. "I don't understand." The elder brother picked a single grape from an ancient vine. "Every choice purchases something. Some choices buy today's comfort. Others quietly purchase tomorrow's freedom." The younger brother looked across the valley. For the first time, he realized his brother had never been living with less. He had simply been building more. Perhaps the greatest luxury is not owning everything you desire. Perhaps it is reaching a place where fewer things are needed to feel complete. Because enough is not a number. It is a decision. And the people who quietly master that decision often discover something remarkable. The less their lifestyle demands, the more opportunities their future begins to offer. In the next chapter, we will discover why the strongest financial lives are rarely built by working harder alone, but by creating quiet streams of value that continue flowing long after today's work is finished. Chapter 4. The River That Never Sleeps. Far beyond the ancient city, where the mountains gave way to fertile plains, flowed a river unlike any other. It was not the widest, nor was it the fastest. Travelers often ignored it in favor of the magnificent waterfalls that thundered across the nearby cliffs. Yet every kingdom depended upon it. Fields flourished because of it. Mills turned because of it. Villages prospered because of it. Day after day, season after season, the river simply kept flowing. One spring morning, a young merchant stood beside its banks with an old engineer who had spent his life designing canals throughout the kingdom. The merchant watched the calm current and asked, "Why does everyone speak so highly of this ordinary river?" The engineer smiled. "It never tries to impress anyone. It simply refuses to stop." The young merchant frowned. "But waterfalls are far more powerful." "They are," the engineer replied. For a moment, he picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. The waterfall makes noise. The river builds civilizations. That lesson stayed with the merchant for years. Only much later did he realize it had almost nothing to do with water. It was about wealth. Many people build their financial lives like waterfalls. Everything depends on a single powerful stream. One salary, one employer, one source of income. As long as that stream continues, everything feels secure. But rivers have taught humanity something different for thousands of years. The strongest waterways are rarely fed by one source. They are strengthened by countless smaller streams quietly joining together. If one stream dries up, the river continues. Life is unpredictable. Companies change. Industries evolve. Economies rise and fall. Skills that were valuable yesterday may become ordinary tomorrow. None of these realities are reasons to fear the future. They are reasons to prepare for it. Security has never come from depending on one source. It comes from building several. There was once a glassmaker whose workshop stood near the city gates. He earned enough to live comfortably. Every morning, he shaped elegant windows for merchants and noble families. His work was respected throughout the kingdom. But every evening, after closing his workshop, he devoted one quiet hour to something no one understood. He carved small wooden toys, birds, boats, tiny castles. His neighbors often laughed. "You already have a successful business. Why waste time making children's toys?" The glassmaker simply smiled. "I'm not making toys. I'm building another door." Years later, a terrible earthquake struck the region. Construction stopped almost overnight. Orders for glass disappeared. Many craftsmen closed their workshops forever. But something unexpected happened. Travelers passing through the city began purchasing the wooden toys as gifts for their children. Soon merchants carried them across neighboring kingdoms. The little workshop survived. Not because the toys earned more than the windows, because they earned something when the windows earned nothing. The second stream had quietly protected the first. Most people imagine additional income as something dramatic. Launching a massive company, working every waking hour, becoming famous. Yet history tells a quieter story. Many lasting fortunes began with humble second streams. A teacher writing lessons during weekends. A craftsman selling designs to distant towns. A musician recording songs that continued earning long after they were written. None of these began as empires. They began as small rivers, patiently flowing, growing almost invisibly. An old fisherman once gave his grandson unusual advice. Never depend on one net. The boy looked confused. But this one catches enough fish. The fisherman nodded. Until the day it doesn't. He pointed toward the harbor where dozens of boats rested peacefully. The sea owes us nothing. Preparation is how we show respect for uncertainty. The same principle shapes financial freedom. When every bill depends upon a single paycheck, life becomes fragile. One unexpected change can shake everything. But each additional stream, however modest, adds strength. Not because it immediately transforms your income, because it transforms your resilience. Resilience is wealth long before wealth becomes visible. There is another reason quiet income matters. It changes the way you see yourself. A person who depends entirely on one paycheck often begins to believe that their value exists only where they are employed. Their confidence rises and falls with performance reviews, promotions, and company decisions. But the moment they create something that generates value outside those walls, a subtle shift occurs. They begin to see themselves differently. not merely as an employee, but as a creator. Creators think differently. They notice opportunities others overlook. They solve problems instead of waiting for instructions. They begin asking, "What value can I create?" instead of, "Who will pay me?" That single question has quietly transformed countless ordinary lives. As twilight settled over the valley, the young merchant returned once more to the river. This time he noticed something he had missed before. Tiny streams emerged from every hillside. Some were barely visible. Others disappeared beneath stones before joining the current again. Alone, they seemed insignificant. Together, they created the river that sustained an entire kingdom. The old engineer stood beside him and said, "People admire the river, but the river owes its strength to the streams no one notices. Your financial life is no different. One thoughtful project, one useful skill, one small investment in your ability to create value. On its own, it may appear too small to matter, but rivers are never born full-grown. They begin as drops, then streams, then currents, then something powerful enough to reshape the land itself. And once those streams begin flowing, another challenge quietly appears. Not earning more, but protecting what you have already built. Because many fortunes are not lost while they are being created. They are lost after they have begun to grow. That is where our journey leads next, to the quiet discipline of building walls around your future before temptation finds its way inside. Chapter 5. The Vault of Tomorrow. There was once an ancient kingdom whose prosperity puzzled every neighboring nation. Its harvests were no larger. Its merchants were no more talented. Its people worked no harder than anyone else. Yet, while other kingdoms collapsed during droughts, wars, and harsh winters, this one endured. Travelers believed the kingdom possessed some hidden treasure buried beneath the palace. Many searched for it. None found anything. One autumn, a young prince finally asked the kingdom's oldest advisor, "Where is the treasure everyone talks about?" The old man didn't answer. Instead, he handed the prince a lantern. "Come." Long after sunset, they descended beneath the royal castle. They passed enormous stone pillars, winding tunnels, and silent chambers until they reached a massive bronze door. The advisor unlocked it with an iron key. Inside, there were no piles of gold, no glittering jewels, no priceless artifacts, only rows of neatly stacked grain, clay jars filled with oil, clean water sealed inside enormous stone vessels, bundles of medicine, seeds carefully preserved for future harvests. The prince looked confused. "This is the treasure?" The old advisor smiled. "No, this is what protects the treasure." The prince frowned. "I don't understand." The advisor picked up a single grain of wheat. "Most kingdoms prepare for good seasons. We prepare for difficult ones. That is why difficult seasons never defeat us. There is a quiet truth about wealth that few people recognize. Money is not valuable because it can be spent. Money is valuable because it creates choices. Every dollar that remains untouched today quietly purchases freedom tomorrow. The ability to walk away from a harmful job. The confidence to face unexpected emergencies. The opportunity to invest when others are forced to panic. Savings are not simply numbers inside an account. They are stored decisions. Decisions waiting patiently for the moment they become necessary. An old shipbuilder once gave his apprentices an unusual assignment. Before they built magnificent ships, he instructed them to construct lifeboats. The apprentices protested. "But customers don't admire lifeboats. They admire the ships." The old craftsman nodded. "Exactly. And that's why most builders think only about the visible." He ran his hand across the unfinished wood. "When storms arrive, no one asks how beautiful the ship was. They ask whether there was a lifeboat." Financial life follows the same principle. Most people devote enormous energy to increasing income. Very little attention is given to protecting it. They celebrate earning more. They rarely celebrate keeping more. Yet protection often matters more than production. A farmer may grow the finest harvest in the valley, but without a granary, the harvest feeds only one season. There once lived a talented blacksmith whose workshop never lacked customers. Every month brought steady income. Every year brought greater success. One evening, another craftsman asked him, "Why do you still live so simply?" The blacksmith led him behind the workshop. There stood a second forge, unused, covered carefully beneath heavy cloth. The visitor laughed. "That forge never earns you anything." The blacksmith smiled. "Not today. But if this one fails tomorrow, my family still eats." The second forge was never built for ordinary days. It existed for extraordinary ones. That quiet preparation gave him something more valuable than comfort. It gave him confidence. Modern life often encourages the opposite. It tells us that every extra dollar should immediately improve today's lifestyle. A better phone, a larger television, a faster car, a more luxurious vacation. The future quietly waits its turn. But the future always arrives. And when it does, it rarely asks whether we felt comfortable yesterday. It asks whether we prepared. Imagine walking through a forest carrying two bags. One is filled with food and clean water. The other contains beautiful decorations. The decorations impress everyone you meet. The food impresses no one. Yet after several days, only one bag continues to matter. Security often appears ordinary, until the moment it becomes essential. An elderly librarian once shared a lesson with a young scholar. He pointed toward shelves filled with books collected over many decades. "People think this library was built by extraordinary purchases." The scholar nodded. The librarian smiled gently. "It wasn't. It was built by ordinary decisions repeated for a very long time." The same could be said of nearly every lasting fortune. Rarely is it created by one spectacular moment. More often, it is assembled quietly through years of patient preparation. As winter approached, the young prince visited the underground vault once more. This time, he no longer saw barrels of grain. He saw peace. He saw freedom. He saw time. Every carefully stored supply represented one less fear about tomorrow. For the first time, he understood why neighboring kingdoms called it a treasure. The treasure had never been the grain itself. The treasure was certainty. Financial reserves serve the same purpose. They cannot eliminate every hardship, but they soften life's sharpest blows. They transform emergencies into inconveniences. They replace panic with patience. And patience is one of the greatest financial advantages a person can possess. Because those who are not forced to act often make the wisest decisions. The old advisor locked the great bronze door behind them. As they climbed back toward the palace, he said quietly, "Every kingdom is tested. The question is never whether winter will come. The question is whether you built your vault while the sun was still shining." The prince carried those words with him for the rest of his life, because he had finally learned that true wealth is not measured by everything you can display today. It is measured by everything that quietly protects your tomorrow. And yet, even the strongest vault cannot create lasting prosperity on its own. For wealth that merely waits will eventually be consumed. Wealth that is wisely placed into productive hands begins to grow. That is where our journey continues next, into the timeless principle that has quietly multiplied fortunes for centuries. The power of ownership. Chapter 6. The garden that grew while its owner slept. There is an old tale about two neighboring estates separated by nothing more than a narrow stone path. The owners were close friends. Every morning they left their homes at sunrise. Every evening they returned just before darkness covered the valley. To anyone passing by, their lives appeared almost identical. They earned similar incomes, owned similar land, worked with equal determination. Yet after 20 years, one estate had become a magnificent garden stretching beyond the hills. The other remained exactly as it had always been. One evening, the second landowner finally asked, "How did your garden become so extraordinary?" "We worked the same hours. We earned nearly the same amount." The first gardener smiled. "We did. But our evenings were different. The next morning, instead of working, he invited his friend for a walk through the estate. They passed towering fruit trees heavy with harvest. Rows of olive groves shimmered beneath the morning sun. Small streams carried fresh water effortlessly across the land. Birds nested peacefully among ancient branches. Everywhere the visitor looked, life was multiplying itself. Finally, he asked, "How do you care for all of this?" The gardener picked a ripe apple from a nearby tree. "I don't." The visitor looked confused. "You don't. I cared for it years ago. Now, it cares for me." There is perhaps no greater misunderstanding about wealth than believing money grows only while we are working. Most people exchange hours for income. When the hours stop, so does the money. There is dignity in honest work. Every civilization has been built upon it. But work alone rarely creates lasting freedom. Because time is limited. No matter how disciplined we become, there are only so many hours in a day. Eventually, every person reaches the same invisible ceiling. The question then becomes, can what I build continue growing after I stop working today? An old carpenter once taught his apprentices a lesson they never forgot. He asked each of them to build a chair. Every apprentice worked tirelessly from sunrise until sunset. By evening, each chair was finished. The carpenter nodded approvingly. Then he asked a second question. "Now tell me, which of these chairs will build another chair?" The room fell silent. None of them could. Every chair would always require another full day of labor. The carpenter smiled gently. "This is the difference between labor and ownership. Ownership is unlike effort. Effort produces. Ownership multiplies. A single fruit tree produces fruit long after the gardener has gone home. A well-written book continues teaching readers decades after its author finishes writing. A thoughtfully built business serves customers while its founder sleeps. An investment quietly grows whether its owner watches it every day or not. The principle remains the same. Ownership allows yesterday's work to continue creating tomorrow's value. This is why patient people often appear lucky. Outsiders see the harvest. They rarely see the seasons spent planting. They admire the orchard. They overlook the years when nothing visible seemed to happen. Compounding is one of the quietest forces in the world. It does not announce itself. It whispers. For months, sometimes years, progress appears almost invisible. Then one day, the accumulation becomes impossible to ignore. The tree that once reached only your knees now casts enough shade for an entire family. Not because it suddenly grew, because it never stopped. There once lived a clockmaker whose workshop became famous throughout the kingdom. Visitors admired his beautiful timepieces. What they did not notice was the small mechanism hidden inside every clock. A carefully balanced spring. Tiny, almost insignificant, yet once wound, it continued moving hour after hour without further attention. One apprentice asked, "Master, why do you spend so much time perfecting the part no customer ever sees?" The clockmaker smiled. "Because the invisible mechanism determines whether the visible clock keeps working." Financial life follows the same principle. Many people rely on motivation. They promise themselves they will save next month. Invest when life becomes less busy. Prepare when circumstances improve. But motivation rises and falls like the seasons. Systems remain. The wealthiest gardens are rarely watered by memory alone. They are connected to irrigation channels that continue flowing whether the gardener remembers them or not. Imagine two travelers preparing for a long journey. The first carries every bucket of water by hand. Each morning he begins again. Each evening he finishes exhausted. The second spends several difficult weeks constructing a simple stone aqueduct. At first, his progress appears slower. Others laugh. "You could have carried far more water by now." He simply continues laying stone. Months later, clear water flows to his home every single day. Without effort, without thought, without beginning again tomorrow. That is the power of a well-built system. The work happens once. The reward arrives repeatedly. Financial systems work the same way. A portion of every paycheck quietly moves into savings before it can be spent. Investments continue month after month without requiring fresh decisions. Bills are handled automatically. Future goals receive attention before today's impulses ever have a chance to interrupt them. Eventually, something remarkable happens. Money stops depending entirely on discipline. It begins depending on design, and good design quietly outlasts emotion. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, the two gardeners stood together beneath the oldest apple tree in the valley. Its branches stretched farther than either man could reach. The visitor looked upward and whispered, "I thought wealth came from working harder." The old gardener gently placed another seed into the soil. Hard work plants the first seed. He covered it carefully with earth. But systems grow the forest. Perhaps that is the greatest shift in every lasting financial journey. First, we work for money. Then we learn to preserve it. Eventually, we teach it to work alongside us. And once that happens, wealth is no longer measured by how many hours we can sell. It begins to reflect the quiet strength of everything we have patiently built. Yet even this is not the final lesson, because fortunes can be earned, protected, and multiplied. But unless the person behind them continues to grow, even the strongest system eventually weakens. That final truth is where our journey ends, in discovering that the greatest investment has never been money at all, but the character of the one entrusted to build it. Chapter 7. The Architect Within. The traveler had spent many months in the hidden city. He had walked its quiet streets. He had stood beneath its ancient bridges. He had explored the underground foundations that supported every magnificent building. He had learned why small leaks destroyed great fortunes, why simple living created hidden strength, why many quiet streams became mighty rivers, why tomorrow deserved its own vault, why gardens grew long after their owners had gone home. He believed he understood the city's secret. So, on the morning of his departure, he visited the old architect one last time. "I think I'm ready," he said. "I know how wealth is built." The old man smiled warmly. "Do you?" The traveler nodded confidently. "I understand the systems now." The architect picked up a small brass key from his desk. It was beautifully crafted, but oddly worn with age. He placed it into the traveler's hand. "This key opens only one door." The traveler looked puzzled. "Which door?" The architect answered quietly. "The one you've been avoiding since the day you arrived." Without another word, they walked beyond the city walls to a lonely hill overlooking the valley. At its summit stood a small stone building unlike any the traveler had seen before. Contained no treasure, no library, no machinery, only a single polished mirror framed in white marble. The traveler laughed softly. "This is the final lesson?" The architect nodded. "It always has been." The traveler stepped closer. He expected to see only his reflection. Instead, he noticed something unsettling. The mirror seemed to reveal more than his face. It reflected every hurried purchase made to impress people who barely remembered him. Every opportunity ignored because it felt uncomfortable. Every excuse he had repeated so often that it had begun to sound like truth. Every promise to start someday. Every moment he blamed circumstances instead of choices. He stepped back. "I don't like this mirror." The architect smiled. "That is precisely why most people never look into it." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, the traveler asked, "So, after all these lessons, what is the greatest obstacle to wealth?" The architect looked toward the city below. "It is almost never the economy, or bad luck, or other people." He turned back toward the mirror. "It is the version of ourselves that refuses to change." Many people search for financial freedom as though it were hidden somewhere outside themselves. They chase better markets, better employers, better investments, better opportunities. Sometimes those things matter, but lasting wealth has always begun somewhere quieter. It begins with identity, because every financial system is ultimately maintained by a person, and people rarely outperform the habits they believe belong to them. If someone believes, "I'm just bad with money," their decisions quietly reinforce that belief. If another believes, "I am someone who builds before I spend," their choices slowly reshape their future. Identity is invisible, yet nothing influences behavior more powerfully. An old calligrapher once accepted two apprentices. Both possessed equal talent. Both practiced with remarkable discipline. Years later, one became a master. The other remained merely competent. A visitor asked the old teacher why. He pointed toward their desks. "The first apprentice came here each day hoping to write beautiful letters. The second came each day determined to become the kind of person who naturally writes them." The difference seems small. It changes everything. Money follows a similar path. Most people focus on outcomes. More income, more investments, more possessions. But outcomes are temporary. Character remains. If discipline disappears, wealth often follows. If wisdom grows stronger, wealth usually returns even after setbacks. History has proven this countless times. Fortunes have been lost, then rebuilt. Businesses have failed, then risen stronger. Markets have crashed, then recovered. The people who endured were rarely those who avoided hardship. They were those who became stronger than hardship itself. The architect led the traveler back toward the city. As they crossed the oldest bridge, the traveler noticed something he had overlooked for months. Every stone carried the mark of the mason who had carved it. Thousands of different hands. Thousands of quiet contributions, yet together, they supported an entire civilization. The architect rested his hand upon the ancient railing. No one stone built this bridge. No one decision builds a wealthy life. It is always the accumulation. The traveler smiled. "For years, I believed wealth was something you eventually reached." The architect shook his head. "No. Wealth is someone you slowly become." The sun was setting as the traveler reached the city gate. He turned for one last look. The marble buildings glowed softly in the evening light. The gardens swayed peacefully in the breeze. Nothing about the city demanded attention. It simply stood, strong, patient, enduring. At last he understood. The city had never been teaching him how to become rich. It had been teaching him how to become unshakable. Because money can be earned, lost, and earned again. But the person capable of creating lasting value, the person who thinks clearly when others panic, the person who quietly builds while others seek applause, that person carries wealth wherever they go. The greatest fortune was never hidden beneath the city. It had been waiting quietly within the architect all along. And now, within the traveler. Epilogue. The first stone. When people speak about extraordinary fortunes, they often begin with the finished palace, the grand estate, the successful company, the investment portfolio built over decades. Rarely do they speak about the first stone, the first dollar saved instead of spent, the first unnecessary expense declined, the first investment made while it still felt insignificant, the first system built for a future no one else could yet see. Every enduring structure begins long before it becomes visible. So does every enduring life. Perhaps, when you close this audiobook, nothing around you will appear different. Your income may be the same. Your circumstances may be unchanged. The world may continue moving exactly as it did yesterday. But if one quiet shift has taken place within you, if you begin seeing money not as something to consume, but as something to direct, if you begin designing your future instead of reacting to it, if you choose patience over performance and ownership over appearance, then the foundation has already been laid. And foundations have a remarkable quality. They are built in silence. They ask for no applause. Yet everything that follows depends upon them. May your wealth grow quietly. May your choices become intentional. And may the life you build stand so firmly that long after temporary trends have faded, your freedom remains steady, resilient, and entirely your own. Because in the end, the greatest blueprint of wealth was never written on paper. It was written in the person who chose to lay the first stone.